The greatest footballers to ever play the beautiful game have all had something in common. From your Maldinis to your Mbappes, every player has a key specialty to their game. Some dominate the field with their passing and vision, such as Guti, Iniesta and Modric. Others are powerful and precise in their finishing, like Suarez, Benzema and Haaland, whilst others light up the world with their quick feet and flair, including Ronaldinho, Neymar Jr and Taarabt. And a very few possess all three of these attributes to a world-class level, that being Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi and Zinedine Zidane. But what if I told you there was a player so adored by his home country, his name would be sang through the streets until the sun rose, and that from his youth many compared him to the late Franz Beckenbauer? Surely someone of this nature would possess a holy amount of natural talent, destined to be the next GOAT of football. Now, what if I told you that instead of all of this, the guy was a con artist who just happened to be best friends with people powerful enough for him to fake a living out of the one thing he loved so much, and that his true talent within the world of football wasn't what he did on the field, but rather what he did off it. This is the story of Carlos Henrique Raposo, more famously known as Carlos Kaiser, a Brazilian striker that forged a 13-year career at 10 different clubs spanning 3 continents. From faking injury scans to pretending to be his own agent, and even starting fights with fans just to stop himself from coming on as a substitute, Kaiser is undoubtedly the greatest footballer to have never played a game. The year is 1970, and a 7-year-old boy in the heart of Brazil has just watched his national team lift the World Cup trophy for the 3rd time in their history, with the likes of Pelé, Jairzinho and Rivellino. Inspired by the art form that's Brazilian football, a young Carlos starts playing in the streets with his friends. Quickly, his name is changed to Kaiser due to his close resemblance to either the German Franz Beckenbauer or Carlos Beer, depending on who you ask. Over time, Kaiser slowly worked on his game and landed positions in the youth academies of Botafogo and Flamengo, 2 highly respected Brazilian sides in the first division. By his 16th birthday, after many trials with teams based in Central America, Kaiser is miraculously given his first professional contract by Mexican side Puebla, after impressing their scouts during a training session. However, after only a handful of months at the team, Kaiser was let go due to poor form, without ever having played a game. At this point, most aspiring footballers would have given up and moved on with their lives, but not Kaiser. He thoroughly enjoyed his brief time as a professional footballer, but not for the reasons most would. Instead of training and wanting to make the first team, Kaiser much preferred both the mateship of his teammates and the perks that came with being an athlete, such as the money, the status, and most importantly, for him, the women. Self-described as sex-obsessed, the ability to pick up women that a footballer has was something he just couldn't give up. That's why when coming back to Brazil after a short stint in Mexico, Kaiser made it his sole mission to become a professional footballer once again. As quoted by the man himself, "I wanted to be among the other players. I just didn't want to play. It's everybody else's problem if they didn't want me to be a footballer. Not even Jesus pleased everybody. Why would I?" With what little skill he had on the field, he sure made up for it with his charisma and personality. One of the most famous Brazilian footballers over the past 20 years, Kaiser had the ability to become friends with people in influential positions that had the ability to carry on his story of lies. Whether it be international footballers, club presidents, journalists, or even himself, Kaiser knew what each person could bring to the table. International footballers would vouch for him to clubs they had friendly relations with. Club presidents could be swayed through his infectious charm into giving him a contract. And journalists would write flattering articles about him in order to influence curiosity by other teams when his contract was running low. A World Cup champion with Brazil and a victim of Kaiser's charm, Bebeto, has gone on record saying his chat was so good that if you let him open his mouth, that would be it. He'd charm you. You couldn't avoid it. For Kaiser, making friends and signing contracts was the easy part, because at the end of the day, life is marketing. The only thing he did struggle with was trying not to look out of place within a squad of professional footballers. No matter the club Kaiser found himself at, he always had an arsenal of excuses, tricks and lies to use in order to avoid being detected as a footballing fraud. When finding himself at both of his former youth club's first teams in 1979 with Botafogo and 1981 with Flamengo, Kaiser would just so happen to pull up with a muscle injury prior to the first practice session, which would sideline him for the foreseeable future. During this time, Kaiser would find himself acting as the club's morale specialist, due to his fun, happy, light-hearted mood, as described by Alexandre Torres. He would tell stories and get players dreaming. I think that's why everybody liked him so much. Because of this boost to the team's spirits, Kaiser would reluctantly be given an extension to his contract, carrying on his exorbitant wage payments and lifestyle as a footballer. Once the ruse had been going on for several months, if not years, the team would either start questioning the legitimacy of his claims or give up on him entirely, where in either case, Kaiser would depart the club in search of another target to help him secure another contract. In his next stopover, this time in Buenos Aires with Independiente, Kaiser bribed youth team members with money to tackle him as hard as they could ahead of his first training session. Coming as a shock to absolutely nobody, Kaiser just happened to get a serious injury that would put him out indefinitely. Keeping up with the same act as he did with the previous clubs, Kaiser paid spectators at both games and training sessions to sing and chant his name whenever the club owner was around, building to his apparent legacy as a footballing prodigy. Similarly enough, after a year and a half, Kaiser left the club. His next club would come as his most famous and dangerous act of his career. Signing to Bangu, another club situated in Rio de Janeiro, Kaiser utilized his strong relationship with a journalist in order to be printed as the main article on one of Brazil's most famous newspapers, as a way of announcing his arrival to the club's fans. The infamous headline, "Bangu has its king," has since become synonymous with Kaiser, as it symbolizes his sheer confidence and arrogance to pull off such a stunt, given the fact that the guy who brought him to the club was also the most dangerous man in all of Brazil. Gestor de Andrade was Brazil's pioneer when it came to running illegal gambling games, aka a bicheiro, whose influence through corruption had a substantial amount of policemen, public servants, prominent politicians, and judges working for him. For example, after a referee made a questionable decision that went against the favour of Andrade, he proceeded to chase the referee around a pitch whilst the gun sat in his back pocket. To cut a long story short, the man could get away with practically anything he wanted without consequences. Kaiser, on the other hand, didn't care for this, and instead chose to keep up with his antics. Now becoming a trademark of Kaiser's signings, he would arrive at his first day at the club with a serious injury, unable to participate in training. However, unlike usual, the manager and club president Andrade took a liking to Kaiser, more so his charm and endless access to women. So much in fact, Andrade would do whatever it took to see him on a football pitch. Late one night, Kaiser got word that he'd be on the bench for the first team the preceding day. Worried about his years of lies finally catching up to him, Kaiser rang up the manager who ensured him that he wouldn't be brought on. Sure enough, the next day, as Bangu went down 2-0 within the first 20 minutes of the game, Andrade yelled out at the manager through his walkie-talkie, whom then told Kaiser to warm up. As he reluctantly improvised a set of stretches and sprints up and down the sideline, Kaiser feared for his life, knowing that no matter what he did, he was going to cross paths with the one man he couldn't afford to. Thankfully, due to the foul mouth of a rival fan who called him a long-haired and some on-the-spot thinking, Kaiser chose to climb the fence that surrounded the pitch to launch a vicious attack on the man who called him out. He quickly found himself with a red card and a call to come back to Andrade's office after the game. Within the remaining half of the match, from which Kaiser spent most of it in the locker room by himself, he came up with a story compelling enough to keep his head on the rest of his body. He cried, "God has taken both my parents away, but gave me another father who they accused of being a crook. So I lost it and went for them. But don't you worry, because my contract is up in a week and I'll be off." Kaiser, the charming and influential man he portrayed himself to be, was instead rewarded with a contract extension and pay rise, to which he saw out. After this close call, Kaiser would move on to French side Ajaccio. Well, reportedly he didn't actually sign to the club, but instead got given the team's kit and posed in photos and made a fake ID in order to give off the impression that he played for them. Despite these rumours, the idea that the Brazilian played in Europe made it far easier for him to secure contracts back in his home country. For his next 7 contracts with a mix of new clubs and some he'd already played for, Kaiser, on top of his existing employees, started using a few more tricks to carry on his web of lies. These involved faking speaking English on a toy phone in an attempt to mimic his agent, which worked all but one time when a scout who could speak English overheard him. Another time he evaded the ways of black magic by saying even it couldn't heal him, and helping teammates overcome alcohol addiction due to his reputation of being a good person. However, sometimes Kaiser wouldn't be able to find a scenario in which he could injure himself, and instead would actually have to train with the first team. In El Rondos, Kaiser would immediately find himself in the middle chasing the ball, dripping with sweat and failing to come even close to getting the ball. Other times when in practice games, he'd make sure to never be in a position to receive the ball, magically finding space where there shouldn't have been. Either way, Kaiser was very rarely ever caught, and if he was, he would be let go without any consequences. Stepping away from football, Kaiser's charm worked on anybody that would listen. Whether that be obtaining hotel bookings where some of Brazil's greatest ever players couldn't, or cheering up workers whilst he dined at their restaurants, before dining and dashing. Yes, you heard that right. Despite making enough money to support half of Rio de Janeiro, Kaiser hated the idea of spending money, because to him, the only thing that mattered was women. Now, as glamorous as this may sound, Kaiser seriously had an issue, and was quoted as saying, "My whole life has revolved around women." This comes from the culture from which he was raised, whereby getting with a woman meant you were macho, something even Kaiser himself isn't proud of. But aside from this, Kaiser managed to retire, if you can call it that, in 1992 with the club where it all began, Botafogo, and now works as a gym instructor for primarily women, because of course he does, it's Kaiser. In every story, I always try to find a message, a deeper meaning that can truly define the actions of someone. But in this case, there's a lot more to unpack. Kaiser for starters knew what he wanted from life, and managed to extract everything out of it, from making friends, to earning a good living, and having the time of his life, and at no point did he ever stop believing in himself. Carlos Kaiser wasn't a scam artist. Sure, he lied, but to him none of that mattered because no one was truly hurt, and in some cases, he may have actually saved a few lives. That's why to the people that know him personally, and to the many that know him because of his story, the greatest footballer to have never played a game is the King of Rio de Janeiro.